From Synozur, this is Polaris. I'm Chris McNulty. In the new world of AI, your content is king. But all too often, that content is trapped in legacy systems, on-premises, or file shares. How do we bridge the old world and the new world? That's the subject of today's episode with my guest, Jordan Uytterhagen. This is Polaris. Welcome to Polaris Pathways. I'm your host, Chris McNulty, Chief Technology Officer at Synozur. Synozur, the transformation company, reimagines business for our clients, navigating strategies and leadership culture with ease. Today, I'm happy to introduce Jordan Uytterhagen. He's the CEO and founder of Cadence Solutions. They specialize in data migration and governance. They've developed a 6-step methodology for successful data migration. There's a lot to unpack there, but before we get going, let's define our terms and our data points. And as always, the references and links will be included in our show notes. According to Forbes, AI readiness with data migration is more important than ever. Companies are increasingly looking to migrate their data to platforms that support AI to better leverage its capabilities for data management and insight. According to CIO Magazine, system consolidation is also gaining momentum. Organizations are seeking to reduce costs and improve efficiencies by migrating data from multiple outdated systems to a single modern platform. And Gartner has talked about risk management, especially during data migration. It's crucial to ensure data integrity and security. Recent studies have shown that organizations that prioritize risk management in their migration strategies are more likely to achieve successful outcomes. Okay, Jordan's waiting in our virtual green room. Let's go. So today on Polaris, I'm excited to be joined by a longtime colleague and friend, Jordan Uytterhagen, who's the CEO of Cadence Solutions in Canada. Jordan, welcome to Polaris.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to be here.
Jordan, I'd like you to talk about your journey, how you got to where you are today. It's the CEO of a major technology integration firm. Where'd you go to college?
I went to college in Edmonton, took programming school for a couple of years, got a diploma, and then went out into the workforce after that.
So you knew back then you were going to be in technology?
I knew somewhere around that. I was pretty young. I started at 17, came out of college at 19. Got made fun of a lot in the first couple jobs for my age before I really got moving.
So what were you like in college?
I think that's really where the work ethic kicked in. I had a lot of time with my grandfather on the farm. He taught me how to work, and that was the time when it really needed to get moving.
My grandfather was a farmer too. Farmers don't suffer laziness or sleeping in very well.
The rule was when he knocks on your door, you get up and go to work, and that would be anywhere between, 5 and 7 in the morning.
Rolling forward from that, what brought you to where you are today at Cadence?
I bounced around a few positions in the public sector and the private sector, made my way into consulting, ended up on some pretty large scale projects for defense companies and telecommunications in the 2007, 8, 9 range. And then we started to have a family. So I settled down, got out of consulting, went to work at my local municipality. I wanted to put my feet up for a little bit and take some easy projects, one of which was OpenText. And it didn't go well. The vendor came in, they didn't do a good job. We terminated the contract, and I kind of looked around at one of my colleagues at the time and said, I think we can go start a company that does this. And he said, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. And I went on and did it on my own after that. And that was around the 2012, 2013 timeframe.
And I know Cadence has had quite a journey with OpenText, and you have a lot of expertise there. But over the years, you've been increasingly connected to the Microsoft 365 world, which is how you and I first came into contact. How do you describe Cadence to someone for the first time?
I describe us as a boutique. We're an information management implementation company. So we stay in our lane in that space. We're experts in SharePoint. We're experts in Purview, specifically the governance side of it, and broadening our scope into data security. So that's where we play. In terms of core services, data migrations, anything around content management, information governance has been the background of the company and my personal background as well. So we do that really well, and we stay in that space, and we continue to grow because of that.
I think when I think about what I know about you and Cadence, I came to think of you all as being deep specialists in compliance, and I think that's true. But increasingly, I know you're being asked to play a role in data migration. Why do you think that's top of mind for people now? Or isn't the cloud sort of established business?
It is an established subscription model that people are paying for, and maybe not as established as people think in the adoption side of things. We have a lot of public sector orgs here in Canada that are fully licensed on E5 and underutilized. And they call us up to migrate the legacy systems into what they're already paying for as a cost savings mechanism and an AI readiness and modernization solution.
So you mentioned AI. Do you find that that is top of mind in public sector the way it is in the commercial sector these days?
Yes, with a caveat on that. We've run some what they call innovation labs with the public sector, specifically on AI tools for document classification. And that was something that I didn't expect to come out of that sector as aggressively as it did. Budgets allocated, hardware allocated, evangelist tools that we'd been testing and trying to achieve the objectives of that. On the private side, there's, I think, a stronger hype train behind it. Adoption is coming, but we're seeing a lot of work on the strategy side, meaning they're taking it a little bit slower in terms of the strategic lens before they go and roll out, Copilot and give it access to things that maybe it shouldn't have access to.
So in your experience, when organizations are going through that migration, there are lots of benefits that those of us who've been working with Microsoft 365 for years come to take for granted. And I imagine many of those clients of yours are thinking about the benefits of AI, but they get there and they discover there's other benefits in M365 beyond just access to Copilot. What are some of the ones that they share with you the most often?
So e-discovery and auditability is a big one. There's a huge gap in that coming from file shares or some of the legacy systems or just having it too disparate that it was never in a system. Second one, surprisingly, we get a lot of feedback on is co-authoring. There's a whole graduated class that's worked for 8 to 10 years now in co-authoring, whether that's in Google Docs or Word Online, that when they get to the workplace, it doesn't exist. You're forced to go back into something that's a check-in, check-out mechanism. You're getting the file share locking problems popping up, and co-authoring is a huge change management win without really needing to do anything. Just roll out a SharePoint instance and have the Word docs go straight into it. So that's a big one we see a lot of, where there is a disconnect between almost generations in terms of the demand for that feature, and it's an inherent benefit.
I've often been intrigued by the interplay between consumer. People sort of take it for granted that I can have multiple people working on a page, working on a file, working on a spreadsheet at the same time. That also leads to a need for better scrutiny of version management and teaching people that Microsoft 365, SharePoint, it's a version system. You don't necessarily need to keep making differently named files that say final, near final, Bob's favorite. I don't know how AI reasons over any of those things. Do you?
It's wild. We still joke around the final gold copy like naming convention. We push back a lot with clients in naming conventions in general. We don't need naming conventions anymore if we're doing full text search, if we have things like versioning or stacking versions. And one of the complications in a migration project, Chris, is what do you do with the old versions from the old system? Do you bring them across? Do you bring across the past 5, 10, 20? What level of auditability and governance do you need in that transition as well?
I do think that's a place where the current state of artificial intelligence is a little bit behind, because those stacked versions are one thing that I think people don't realize, that AI is going to reason over the most recent version of something. So it's not yet able to say what the most important changes over the past month have been in a given document, right? But the flip side, as you know, is that if I have a final and a final, AI might think both are of equal weight, and they're not.
Yeah, and we've actually worked with one of the tools that you can set the weight based on the naming of a file or a location. So if final is in the file name twice, it will have a heavier weight than if it's in there once. So you can start to kind of play based on the workings of the organization as you're doing migrations and moving data in. So it's quite interesting how that I've done this for 15 plus years and that still hasn't gone away, and it's kind of bred its way into the next group of workers that are working in tools that enable that behavior, and to work them out of that is a difficult thing to do.
Well, remember, file names are for people. Like all of the things that you see at M365 are for people. I know that from behind the scenes, when I was at Microsoft, customers would sometimes wonder about Microsoft's access to the data. And I'd have to remind them that our relationship with you is very important and we like to speak to you by name. But as far as your data is concerned, it's all just numbers. You're a GUID, your file name is a GUID, your company name is a GUID. It just doesn't make any sense inside of the data center. It's the human side is where that comes together. We've moved, I think, well beyond the days of treating migration as a pump and dump approach to just lifting files from one place to another. I know you have a more disciplined approach to how you approach migration. There's a couple of steps. Where do you start?
We start right at the initiation of identifying the data, and that doesn't mean, oh, I have an X drive, move the whole thing, or oh, I have open text, move the whole thing. And it's which business unit, department, which information goes first. So we identify that and prioritize it based on that. Are we taking oldest data first? Are we taking that last? What does the outage look like? So that entire identification side of things is the first step in the process.
Do most organizations know where their critical data lives?
No, not a chance.
With that, how realistic is it to move everything to Microsoft 365 to get ready for Copilot? Is that even feasible, do you think?
It's feasible. There's a few areas that struggle, specific authoring apps, anything in the Adobe suite, anything with a lot of linkages, so DWG files. Those are a little more difficult to get up into the platform. But I'd say generally you can get 90% of your content up there quickly, and start to prepare and be ready to utilize Copilot and the AI side of things. Getting there and convincing the organization or your sponsors that we should look at doing an information architecture first, that we shouldn't just do that, pump and dump all the way into the environment, is where we kind of hit the brakes a little bit and slow down, and the governance, rules kick in to make sure that it's usable from a people side of things and not just usable from a machine side of things.
So you mentioned information architecture. I'm going to toss you a curveball there. At the AIM conference this year and a couple of sessions since then, there have been online discussions about the importance or non-importance of information architecture. So one school of thought is focused on the need to have crisply defined structures, whether in the Microsoft sense, we're talking about sites and libraries and folders and metadata and versions and security and connections. The contrary opinion is that all of that extra superstructure around information is superfluous because AI can reason over all that information and determine the context and the properties inside of the document and the relevant security. When you think about the need for information architecture, or if it's invalidated by AI, how do you see that?
Well, I'll give you my same old spiel I give to most prospects or customers. There's two types of users you're going to run into. There's filers and there's pilers. And you can make one the other. So I can make a file system, a few folder structures within a site and a library, that a piler behavior can be happy. Now, the pilers, you go ask your colleagues, there's someone that has 50,000 emails in the inbox level of Outlook, and then there's the other folks that use subfolders. If I build a structure in SharePoint for, let's say, accounts payable, we have accounts payable, then we have invoices, and we have it maybe sorted by vendor, nothing too extensive, no year structure and stuff like that. The filers are happy. They know where to put their things, which is the main change management hurdle. Where do I put this stuff? If I know where to put it, I know where to find it. The pilers are, let's say, the AI advocates that are going to be out there just, hammering into a search query to find something or hammering into a filter. they can flip the view to no structure and still have the same working experience. So you don't really dig a hole for the organization. Now, further to that, there's a lot of, we'll say, old school consultants out there that want to go 7, 8, 10 levels deep in structure, 15 metadata fields deep, and that just becomes problematic for both personalities, the filers and the pilers. And that's where we kind of come in and maybe have a little bit of sparring or friction with that past consultant that wants to do all the metadata capture. And we say, you only need 2 fields or fields of 2 kinds. Anything we're going to do a records management disposition on, and potentially anything you're going to do in-depth reporting on. Now, with AI, you could argue you might not even need those 2 fields anymore if the model's as accurate as it should be.
Years ago, I was working on a project. Their data migration, which was file server to SharePoint on premises, was being driven by the legal department, who had gone through and had an intern go through every file cabinet and go through every file label and wanted to create a content type for every possible kind of file, which was a number about 1,500, and didn't understand why they didn't want to have 1,500 content types in every document library. And even though, as we pointed out, half of the files in your system have no paper in them. So why do you want to create them? I do think there's sometimes stuff that gets a little ornate. But yeah, I think there's an approach there.
So it reminds me of a client we had, and he walked up to the whiteboard, and we were doing this, integration classification project, and he drew a circle. And he's like, this happens on the left, this happens on the right, this is the magic circle. Oh, this is what the middle needs to do. And we're like, well, we can't do that. Like, it's not possible at this time. This is probably 8 years ago. It was actually in Washington State. And I still chuckle about the magic circle, me and a couple guys here, because it was so impossible to achieve what he wanted. We could do it now, but we couldn't then. So maybe he was a bit of a visionary.
Jordan, I know you work on some really large migrations, and we've seen the just volume of data that people have been keeping and are continuing to build has mushroomed. I was talking with Sean Squires from Microsoft on this podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked about what 175 zettabytes of data means. It's a stack of paper, 1.8 light years high. Now, is the volume of data and the time it takes one of the concerns you have, or are there other things that you see pop up during migrations that you need to be mindful of?
Volume isn't as much of a concern. I guess it'd be the outage time around moving the data, and if it's accessed daily, we don't want to take too big of an outage window to stifle business. They usually mean setting things to read only and just having it in a dormant mode while the data is moving. Back to the earlier conversation in terms of what do you do first for priority? Do you take the archive stuff last? Do you take that first? We like doing this stuff on holiday weekends because it's an extra day of outage. Cadence staff aren't too thrilled about that, but that is the best practice to move any data.
Okay. Thinking about migration where you're moving to, sometimes I'm sure you run into organizations where there's people who are reluctant to give up where the information has been. What are the risks of staying on a less modern technology stack that you see happen time and again?
One, I think it's employee retainment. One of the big risks is a lot of folks go from, and you're old enough to get this reference, Chris, I hope. So you go from Jetsons technology at home to Flintstones technology at work. And all your stuff's behind, and it takes forever to do your jobs. Generally your job satisfaction is lower. That's the first piece. The second piece, and probably even more important, is security. What E5 brings to the table is all the security tentacles that you can leverage straight out of the box. All the Purview DLP stuff, going through and doing audits and e-discovery on anything if you have to disclose public records, or you're checking in on staff in terms of where they're accessing information. So that's another benefit that just moving through in modern technology, not to mention the other things, co-authoring search, AI readiness, AI essentially executing inside your environment.
Yeah, reducing that attack surface, I know, is top of mind for many organizations.
Okay.
Jordan, when you're approaching a new client who needs to move data from point A into the cloud, what are some of the tools and services that Cadence offers to help make sure that goes quickly and smoothly?
Yeah, we essentially have a migration as a service right now with one of our solutions we built after testing a few out in the marketplace. It's called Peregrine. It migrates out of OpenText and other legacy ECM systems into SharePoint Online. So it's one of our, I guess you could say, our secret sauce in terms of knowing both ecosystems and having a solution that migrates that content in. Recently finished up a project at a Fortune 500 with it, and they're very happy with the result of moving off of the old world and into the new.
Do you find, especially when you have to work with the business side, that they may not understand the complexity, understanding that it's more than just moving files? Like, how do you explain to them that it's more than just picking up an Excel file in OpenText and dropping it off in Microsoft?
Yeah, if we expand that question into, we want to sunset an ECM system, right? We're not just moving off of the file share. It's something a little more complicated. If it's been used to its, capacity or anywhere near, there's more than just documents in there. There's a records retention schedule attached to everything. There's workflows, there's custom scripting, sometimes there's custom modules. All of that has to be decoupled to successfully sunset that old system and move entirely into SharePoint Online. That could bring with it Power Automate, that could bring with it other workflows, specific things in Teams to re-solution what was working previously in the other system. So to answer your question, yes, it's more complicated than most clients or prospects would approach us with. But they're not sure of the why it's so complicated. And as we dig into the underpinnings of the old system, then it starts to be revealed to them and the trust is built.
So what are the lessons when you're working with a new client that you try to imprint on them to help make sure that the migration goes well? What's the advice that they usually find most helpful?
So if I take my, vendor hat off and I was just, walking into someone on the street and they're like, we're going to go do a migration, get a vendor that knows the system you're coming out of. There's a ton of vendors that know the system you're going into. There's a ton of SharePoint vendors out there, and everyone will generally say like we've done something in SharePoint. But the real expertise and the value in those projects is, do you understand the system you're extracting from? Once you get the data out of that old system, you're home free. Anyone can get data into SharePoint. It's, can I get it out of the old system? And that's the piece that we really kind of I'll hit home with the prospects is we know how to do this, or find a vendor that knows how to do that. If you're extracting out of some old, they had one called like file cabinet or something, like, we don't know how to do that. We're not going to participate in that project unless they're going to be given a lot of leeway to learn on the extraction side. So
I found that the platforms also make certain assumptions at the file level. Of course, a file is a file is a file, but you have things like workspaces and sites and libraries and single instance stores and multiple instance stores and different compositions of the data dictionary. Some things that are stored as links, some things that are stored as blobs. That I do think, obviously it's a complex area and it's more difficult and hopefully more satisfying when you're seeing what good looks like. So let's talk about that a little bit. When you think about some of the clients you've helped, what does good look like? What does great look like in a migration? And what does it feel like for the organization once they're finished?
So great is no data loss and done on the schedule you committed to, or we committed to.
Can you think of an example?
Yeah, honestly, most of ours fall into that category, and that's not just self-promotion. It takes just meticulous planning to get to that, and not over-committing early in the sales side, which can happen a lot with vendors. The example specifically, the Fortune 500 company I mentioned previously, they had their content stored in an ECM cloud environment, and one of the hardest things for that client was getting their data out of that cloud so it could be migrated. So to my previous point of, once we get the data out, we kind of know we're home free. That was the battle on that project. And that actually kept moving the schedule later and later because the ECM vendor wasn't playing nice and wasn't obeying the contract or honoring the contract they committed to for data residency. So that was maybe not one of the great ones, but one of the battle wounds from going through a larger migration without having all the data at our fingertips.
So when you think about that client, how much of it was the desire to get away from a legacy platform versus the desire to be able to empower something that you're getting in Microsoft? And if with that, I'm curious, what were the factors on both sides of that?
So the cost was a primary factor. The cost of paying for a hosting and a managed service provider of an ECM system was worth more than they valued in terms of moving into the E5 stack. The other pivot point on that, Chris, and this was one of your babies, was syntax. They're very interested in doing things with syntax to replicate what the other system could do. So that was one of the desires, is to move forward. Is there was more of a reason or a compelling event based on advancing technology, not just having SharePoint Online, but all the other pieces that came with it in the syntax build out or release, that made it a lot more valuable to them to pull the trigger and begin to exit the old world.
When you think about all of the capabilities Microsoft has brought to the forefront in the past few years, the syntax document processing piece being part of it, Copilot, what do you like? What's one of your favorite things that Microsoft has done in this space?
I'm still team syntax. I got the coat and the mug to prove it still, Chris, which I think came from one of the events we were at. And Ian knows that too. In terms of syntax, what impressed me, or what was really valuable, and specifically in the content management world, was I thought it had a lot of legs and could have took a run at Kofax specifically because of the ease of integration and because of the trust boundary with it being inside of 365. I think that gave a lot of gasoline to that fire upon launch. If we want to go where it went a little sideways, I think the licensing model change took a little bit of the momentum out of that product, and we saw that firsthand the day of the switch, which was tough on our part.
When syntax was first launched, what we heard most often was that customers didn't understand hybrid pricing because some of it was tied to a seat, but some of the other classifications were pay as you go, and they didn't understand. Jordan, many years ago, I was intrigued by the pervasive size of notes migration, whether people were moving documents or messaging, that it still happens, that things still continue to bounce along and that there's a steady state of migration. At some point, some of that legacy tech has to dwindle. But I also know that there's a future where the engines for migration start to be used for other things. What do you think is happening next in the world of migration?
If we're focusing on just migrating data, I think you're right that it'll continue. It'll always continue. There'll always be another system that folks and organizations want to move to. What we're seeing now is the opportunity to classify or understand your data along the path in the migration. So what I mean by that is I have 10 terabytes on a file share. This is a customer story from us. It was a merger. One company bought another company for billions of dollars. They inherited all their data. So they inherited their mess. They want to migrate that data in, but before they migrate that data in, they want to find the crown jewels out of that data and push that in first. Then after that, they want to go pull the rest of the data in. So some of the Microsoft tools aren't helpful in that immediately. You have to get the data into the ecosystem before you can actually utilize things like autofill or maybe Copilot or even anything in Foundry for AI engines. So finding those crown jewels in that mess of the acquired data is one of the trends that we're starting to see. So move the good stuff first, identify it and classify it before migration. And then after we've migrated that in, you can set the rules on it if you wanted to autofill, extract information, if we want to put retention labels on it for purview records, sensitivity labels, subsequent DLP on top of that. That's all part of the journey now. And that's one of the trends I've really seen pick up in the past 24 months. And my belief on that is GPT made a whole bunch of people AI believers. And now that's a reality that can be done essentially on premise prior to migration.
Well, Jordan, I know you've heard the podcast before, so you know the question that I'm about to ask you. which is to take you away from the world of managed services and data migration and out into the broader world, the world of culture, the world of movies and songs and books. What's something that you've experienced lately that's had a connection with you?
I'm reading Shoe Dog right now. It's the Nike story. It's amazing. I'm about halfway through it in terms of the ups and downs of building a business as an entrepreneur. I've been there as well, not at that scale, but that's one that's quite interesting to me. I call me a business documentary nerd. I'll watch anything like that. One of my favorite movies is Founder, the McDonald's movie.
Have you seen Air? The movie about Nike?
Air is great.
Does Shoe Dog go beyond the Air Jordan, Michael Jordan signing era and look at the whole history of the company?
I'm halfway through, so I'm at page 150. We haven't hit, I think the year's like 1969 right now in the Nike spectrum. So I haven't hit that point yet.
One I'll recommend to you, if you haven't read it, is Too Big to Fail by Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Too Big to Fail, no. Okay.
So it's a story of the 2008 financial crisis. And he went back and went through court documents and public records about everything that happened, like with the fall of Lehman and the fall of Bear Stearns. He does depositions and figures out what people were saying to each other. So he writes it like it's a novel. Like, it was a rainy day as Hank Paulson stepped out and checked his Razor phone. The first message he saw was da-da-da.
One of my favorite movies and books is The Big Short. So I'll go pick up Too Big to Fail because it's the same era.
Oh, Big Short was a lot of fun. I'm always impressed with any writer or filmmaker who can take profit-making and statistics and make it a really compelling and gripping narrative.
How about American Greed? That show.
I've not seen that. How about Moneyball?
Moneyball's great. War Dogs.
War Dogs was a lot of fun.
War Dogs.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up the Cinema Circle here. And Jordan, it's been great having you here on Polaris. What's next for you, and what's the best way for the audience to stay in touch?
Yeah, next for me, sticking around home all summer. So no big trips this year. Did a big one last year. If they want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you can spell my last name, you can find me. Otherwise, the short handle is ECM Jordan. And you can follow me or Cadence there as well. And we do a lot of free content on M365 and everything around governance records.
We'll put those links in the show notes. There's so much more that we could get into, but I know we're a little bit limited on time. So, Jordan Uytterhagen, CEO of Cadence Solutions, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chris.
We'll be right back. Up next on Polaris, events. We're about halfway through 2025, but there seem to be more events than ever coming up. Here's what we're watching. M365 Community Days, New York. This will be July 25th at Microsoft New York in Times Square. Seattle Tech Week, starting July 28th, over 70 events in and around the Emerald City throughout Seattle, Washington. TechCon 365 Atlanta, August 11th to 15th at the Georgia World Congress Center. FY26 Forward. On August 26th, I'll be sitting down with our CEO, Michelle Caldwell, for a fireside chat online about Microsoft's plans for the new year and how Microsoft partners can best align for success. The North American Collaboration Summit. This will be September 7th through 9th in Branson, Missouri. The TribalNet Conference, September 14th to 18th in Reno, Nevada. The London Tech Leaders Summit, October 7th to 8th at the Minster Building near the Tower of London in London. Experts Live, October 10th at Microsoft New York in Times Square again. The Vancouver AI Summit, this will be held October 20th at the Harbour Centre in Vancouver, British Columbia. Those are just some of the events we're attending. Wrapping up the year, we're looking ahead to TechCon 365 in Dallas and Microsoft Ignite this November in San Francisco, as well as ESPC 25 this December in Dublin, Ireland. We'll have more details later in the year. We'll have links to all of that and more in the show notes. You can learn more at Synozur.com/events, and we'll add more events throughout the year. And if you have an upcoming event you'd like us to promote on Polaris, please get in touch and we'd be happy to include it. Well, that's going to do it for another episode. I'd like to thank our guest, Jordan Uytterhagen, for joining us and sharing his thoughts on migration. We encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about today and more. Visit us at polaris.synozur.com. Send us your questions and feedback for the Synozur team. You can reach us via email at polaris@synozur.com. Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. And follow us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Polaris is produced with the help of Riverside.fm. Our theme song, Alternative Dream, is provided courtesy of Adobe. Additional music and sound provided by Indie Guy Records. Graphic design by Josh Brantley. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris McNulty, and this has been Polaris, a show that charts the course for business and technology transformation from Synozur. Learn more at Synozur.com. See you next time.